the urgency and focus is about ensuring that everyone has that calibrated view of what the most important thing to do is. Like, we're all human at the end of the day, right? So we all have the things that we get passionate about. We all have the things that we get emotional about, me included. So I think learning the tactics to help take the emotion out of situations in a work environment can be really helpful.
Welcome to the We.Are.Powerful podcast, celebrating the people and teams who make the changes in themselves to transform the results for others in the organisations and communities they are part of. I'm James Russell, an organisational change consultant and coach.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Sellers. I'm the founder of Blue Heron Training. We're on a mission to help people and improve cultures wherever we go. And I must say, I'm super excited to be part of this. Thanks for inviting me.
So look, we're going to be talking to some truly inspiring people with powerful stories to tell. So tune in, subscribe to make sure you get alerts when new episodes are released. So this week we are talking navigating through change and influencing the organisation we work in during this period. So Laura was my buddy when I joined esure in 2021. And from the day I've known her, she's led from the front, was so good at confronting the tough issues, but without being confrontational at the same time. So I thought she'd be a great person to have on the show, talk about what we went through, because it was some pretty wild stuff and wild times we worked and lived through. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Welcome, Laura. It's good to meet you and good to have you on the show.
Nice to meet you too.
Laura, could you, just for a little bit of context, James, you and Laura know each other. I'm new to the party. So Laura, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Laura Thom. I currently work at Ageas, which is a UK insurer that recently purchased esure. If you've not heard of esure, you probably do remember Sheila's Wheels and the pink glittery dresses and the pink car. That's us. So I've worked there for the past 5 years. I've spent the last 25 years working in change and transformation. So that's my background. That's all I've ever done. It's all I've ever known. And I've worked in and with lots of different organisations going through change.
And it's probably worth just adding, given the fact that a lot of insurance companies have been around for centuries, esure was a relatively young 20-year-old insurer, and Bain Capital acquired it in 2018, and a major transformation was needed ahead of it being sold. I joined in 2021, Laura was there, the team was there, and there were some pretty stretching goals to do a complete root and branch transformation of the business and modernise it. And then we had some extra headwinds that came and hit us, didn't we, Laura?
Yeah, so I think we had the triple threat of COVID, then we had the Ukraine war, and then we had the energy crisis that broke out off the back of it.
How many of our developers were based in Ukraine?
It was certainly a material number, and our platform provider were predominantly based in Eastern Europe. So I think those three things together definitely created additional headwinds for us.
So if I can sort of be the voice of people listening to the podcast from all ranges, or what were some of the significant challenges you experienced as a senior leader during that process?
I think aside from all of those outside things that James has already touched on, I think the single biggest challenge that we had was around trying to do too many things at the same time.
Big transformation programs are pretty intense, high pressure environments. You've got people from esure, the company that's being transformed. We had a consultancy firm working with us. We had a technology platform with people that were there to help configure the system and implement it.
Just to give people some context around the size of esure as an organisation, at the time that we started the transformation, we had about 2,000 employees within esure. So very much a mid-level organisation.
And there was a lot of running around trying to meet tough deadlines and just deal with things that would come in left field. So anyone that's been through a big transformation program will know what that's like. But with those extra external events, it certainly made it a bit spicy.
Yeah, definitely a bit spicy. And I think whilst the transformation was technology led, this was very much intended to be a transformation of all aspects of esure. So everything from the culture and the ways of working to how the offices were kitted out to the working patterns that people had, the tools that we were able to use as colleagues day to day, literally every single thing. And I know it's an overused analogy, but that one about, you're flying a plane through the air and you're trying to change the engine, repaint the branding, refit out the cat. It was definitely one of those.
And one of the tensions I felt as someone coming in relatively new or partway through this program in 2021 was absolutely clear goals and outcomes that you always have at the beginning of a program, but also a culture from probably the older esure. You had a founder that had been in there since 2001. So they had a very strong influence on how things were. And that was a way of working. And it was a very caring, kind of paternal organization. But suddenly, faced with stretching goals from a private equity owner, that was tough. And there was a tension there. And I think, Alex, to your question, one of the things that we were trying to navigate was the tension between we want to set realistic goals and we want to be open and transparent and communicate, but many of us have been scarred by previous chief execs and leaders who have literally said things like, that's not the answer I want to hear, James, go away and come back when you've got the answer I want to hear. And you just like think, man, is that really a helpful way to batter me into compliance? Or it's just going to batter me into telling you what you want to hear, even though it's not realistic at all. And then we've just deferred a problem until it gets even more acute. So I think there's a definite tension there between being safe and open to talk about these things, but not having your head bitten off when you share something that isn't perhaps what they wanted to hear. So Alex, we work with clients where we talk about the approach of a top-down command and control, stretching goals versus more of a leader kind of culture with open communication. Laura, how would you describe what we were working in? Do you think it was one or the other, or a mixture of both? Did it change over time?
I think it definitely changed over time, and I think it already started to change even by the time that I joined at the end of 2020. So I guess for anyone who hasn't worked in that private equity construct before, certainly how that played out for esure was Bain Cap bought esure from Sir Peter Wood, who founded esure, and then set about installing almost an entirely new executive leadership team to then lead the transformation of the organisation. And so I think all the execs, apart from maybe one, I think, were different to who had led the organisation prior to the sale. And those execs were very much recruited with the transformation in mind. And the intent was that the entire organisation would mobilise behind the transformation. So it wasn't a thing that would happen over there in a change or transformation team. It would be something that the entire organisation got behind and was involved in and was impacted by. And so we had a leadership team, including you and I, James, who all had a background and experience in executing change. So I don't think we had a team who were hired for the BAU. We hired a bunch of people that we knew could come in and agitate for change. That was kind of what was recruited for. One of the things that became quite clear to me as someone who's worked in much bigger organisations was, on one level, there was a real collective acknowledgement and motivation to achieve a singular outcome, which was to complete migration of our entire policy book onto our new platform, which we needed to build, and to deliver alongside it the material improvements in customer experience and colleague experience that would come with that, enabling Bain Cap to then divest themselves of esure and for us to be bought by someone else. I think that context is quite specific to having that type of ownership model in place. You could see and feel it from the minute you joined. The leadership team, so not just the exec, but down into the kind of senior management tier, were very focused around achieving that outcome. I think how that then translated day to day changed over time. So I think we had some people within our leadership team who had experience of delivering in more agile, iterative environments. And then we had some people who were very much used to and comfortable with more waterfall, big bang delivery. And then we had some people who were kind of in the middle, open to trying new things, but not quite sure about which way they wanted to go. And I think a lot of the time and effort that we invested across that transformation was about how can we, if it's a spectrum and you've got some people here with the more traditional models and some people here with the more iterative approach, how did you bring people along that spectrum? There was certainly tension, particularly across the first 12 to 18 months, where you had people who understood what that different way of working would feel like in comparison to a more traditional model, which is what esure had up until that point. It was quite difficult because that tension played out in lots of different interactions in lots of different ways. You had product leads or product managers who felt like they didn't have ownership for their own backlogs, their priorities, their visions, because they felt like it was being dictated to them. I often see that in organizations where you have different leaders who have different sets of priorities and everybody has their pet projects.
And Laura, what would you say, again, just from your experience, what would you say unlocked the dialogue that needed to happen? We've done a lot of work with people with pet projects. That rings a lot of bells. Yeah, people can be quite protective.
That wasn't really the context at esure because we had everyone pulling in the same direction to achieve this outcome of completing migration. But what we did have, though, was when you went down to the next layer below that, there were lots of potential ways that you could achieve that outcome in terms of the feature set, the richness of it, how mature the capability would be. And I think that whilst I think James and I and other leaders, including on the exec, could see that we were trying to do too many things at the same time, or when you sequenced that work, it was not going to fit in within the time frame that had been agreed with Bain. It was really challenging to get some of our leaders to start to step back from the particular set of priorities that they had in their mind that were required to achieve that outcome. So it was almost like some people were emotionally wedded to achieve that outcome and that benefits profile. We have to, I'll make it up, we have to do these 100 things. Whereas actually for some of us, we could look at it and see, well, actually, do you know what? You could still get most of that benefit with 65 of those 100 things, and maybe, you know, some workarounds that we have in BAU, some stuff that we'd maybe do post-migration. And I think that was the struggle that we had, was trying to get people to loosen their ties with Plan A and start to think about Plan B.
And Laura, what would you say unlocked those kind of conversations?
I think there were a couple of things that drove it. Midway through the programme or towards the end of the second year, I think that the levels of trust that the leadership population had in one another had increased quite exponentially. We'd been through the wars a little bit by that point, right? Because there'd been so many challenges to deal with. And therefore, I think the relationships that you have improved, the trust levels have increased. You've got to know people kind of outside of work as well as inside of work, and actually your team dynamics have shifted as a result. Yeah. I think one of the things that was always the case from the minute I joined esure was the level of openness that existed. So it's a very flat structure, and it is to this day, right? We very much succeeded in turning it from being a hierarchical organisation to one where, you know, everyone is able to exert a view. It doesn't mean that that view will be the prevailing one, but I think people very much feel like they are able to voice an opinion and that will be heard.
And I think that
psychology. Yeah, so I mean, I think even when it felt more challenging to land some of these messages in terms of garnering support for a different way of working, I think from day one it felt like you were able to voice an opinion, and I think that sparring, that vigorous debate was definitely a feature. James is smiling around how we worked, right? So there was never a sense that, I think it was genuinely that there was so much that had been invested personally and emotionally in a plan that was a particular shape over a particular time frame to achieve these outcomes, that it wasn't until the end of the second year when it became really apparent to everyone that we were running out of road, right, and investment budget, because, you know, that's finite. And I think then people who had been more invested in the previous plan and approach looked at it and said, actually, we've got 12 months to do this. Like, we now see that all of this work cannot fit in that window. If we still want to achieve that benefit outcome, what's the path through that? and James, I know you and I had spoken about this before. I remember really vividly being sat in a room in our head office with our initiative backlog, which had about 50 items on it, and literally just going through it saying, okay, do you need this for migration? No. Right, we're not doing it. Do you need it? Yes. Okay. We're not sure. Okay, we'll go and check. And that was literally the conversation that we had with some of the exec, and then we took it into the leadership team and everyone agreed. I mean, James, I had this conversation with you about, we've all worked in big organizations where there's an incident, right? Something that requires the whole organization to mobilize behind resolving an issue for customers or for colleagues. And afterwards, everyone will say, oh, that was really great. You know, we're really good in a crisis. Everyone really pulls together. It feels really fantastic. And like, why is that what it takes for a team to work really and really be at the top of its game? Because that to me is the antithesis of what it should be like. And that last year of the transformation felt like an incident in a good way, in that I felt like the team were on their absolute A game, right? We knew exactly the outcome we were heading for. We knew the path we wanted to go through. And not only that, where we were deviating from that path, the behaviours that you saw in the entire leadership population was, okay, like, let's get in a room and work it out. We've got the 3 points of our delivery. So we can either look at the date, we can look at the scope, we can look at the capacity, and how do we cut through and have really rapid decision making? And how can we put that decision making as close to the teams who are doing the work as possible, so that you're not waiting on, you know, steering groups or committees to make those decisions. You're literally doing that every day in the work. And that's where we ended up.
And Alex, this is the reason I wanted to get Laura on the podcast, because you can imagine being in a management meeting where people are pulling in different directions. I need this and I need that and this and that. Someone like Laura to come in and just to calmly say, we can't do everything, state the facts, but do it exactly as you've just heard, was such a powerful and effective way of doing it. But I think that was such a useful intervention to help an organization deal with so many competing demands. Many organizations are facing that challenge of prioritization, aren't they?
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. I was just going to say one last thing on that topic. Do you know I'm not alone in having this reflection, right, around if we had our time again, like, what would we do differently? And I think there were loads of things that have come out of it, right? I could talk for hours about all the things we would do differently. But for me, there are 2 really material things that made a difference. And I think one of those was not trying to do too much. And the second was the pace at which we tried to mobilise additional capacity into the teams delivering this change. It blew up in that first year because we brought on, I think, 250 people in the space of 3 months. And even in a mature organisation, you will struggle to do the right discovery that you need to be able to deliver software effectively in that kind of environment. And we definitely felt that. So I think those would be the 2 things that I think would make the biggest difference next time.
So I think the thing I'd like to dig into a bit more, Laura, is that this ability that you've got just to help sit people down, state the facts, just bring everyone to that sort of calm, logical way of doing it. Is that something that you've had to develop over time? Has it been a hard thing for you to do? What does it take to you to do that? Or is it something that is just natural to you?
You're implying I have the level of self-awareness to be able to like have concluded on that question. I mean, I think it's a bit of both. I think part of it is just how I'm wired, in that my motivation in life around how I work is to be part of a team that is successful, right? That's what drives me. And obviously, as part of that, it would be challenging to be part of a team that is successful where you individually are not, and it's like defined success, right? But for me, like, if the team is winning, then I feel like I am winning. And that's how I'm wired. And I think from the outset, I felt like I was part of the team at esure, and still do today. I think it, for me, as someone who's worked in lots of different teams driving transformation and change, that felt quite special and different in terms of that setup. We had really capable, experienced people, And whilst you might not always get on with everybody every day of the week, and you could have differing opinions, and we all have bad days, it very much felt to me, and I'm sure there are others who perhaps didn't feel the same way, but it felt to me like we were part of a team, and that I wanted that team to be successful at what they were doing. So I think that's part of it. I think the thing that I have become more aware, I think, as my career has progressed, is that we're all human at the end of the day, right? So we all have the things that we get passionate about. We all have the things that we get emotional about, me included. And so I think learning the tactics to help take the emotion out of situations in a work environment can be really helpful. And I don't mean, for example, if you are supporting a colleague who's having a really struggling time, right? That's not the stuff I'm talking about. But where you are trying to navigate a path to get a decision made, or have a senior stakeholder group that you're trying to bring on board, those types of situations, finding ways to dispassionately make your case insofar as you use data to drive and support those decisions, and exert an objective viewpoint, I think is something that can set you in really good stead. Partly because that then becomes part of your reputation, right? So then people know that you're not forming camps, you're not forming allegiances, you don't have politics to play, like you're genuinely invested in the outcome. And so when you're exerting a view, it's based on data, and it's because you genuinely think that's the right thing, not because there's some personal gain that you're trying to get out of it. And I think that not having that kind of what I'd call bad politics. I'm not very good at playing political games, as James knows. That's not really how I'm wired, and I find it quite challenging to interact with people who are. They can run rings around me, right? Because I'm just like, I'm no good at it.
But there's strength in that, Laura, isn't there? Because you don't
course.
you don't go
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
You can play the absolutely, well, this is what we're trying to do. We've got a clear goal. These are our choices. It's very logical. It's very hard to get embroiled in games that people might be trying to hook you into.
Yeah. So I think it's partly how I'm wired, and partly just becoming more and more conscious of something that I think I have done, but I have done even more so over the years, which is, how do you present an objective viewpoint, presenting the different outcomes, right? One of the reasons why I think people can get really frustrated or angry or upset when you're working on change and transformation is because they become so invested in a particular outcome, as I was saying, in a particular path to achieve that outcome. And I think part of your role as a change professional is to say, well, actually, that is one of probably multiple paths that we could go down, or multiple outcomes that may result depending on what happens. And getting people really comfortable with being uncomfortable from the beginning.
Yeah.
You can achieve that outcome, but the path to get there might be a bit different to the one that you have in your mind just now. And having that conversation really early on, because the sooner you do it, then I think the more you build up that discipline and that muscle with people who perhaps aren't used to that way of working. And I think when you look at more traditional change models like waterfall, we're going to build the whole thing, we'll test the whole thing, we'll implement it. Whereas iterative approaches are much more about how can we respond and adapt. And I think esure is a great example where we started out with this plan, right? And then there were a change in regulations as well, right, James? That meant we wanted to then develop an entirely new product, which, Alex, was never part of the roadmap in the first place, right? So we then went, oh, we're going to do that first, and then we'll do everything else. And it's like, okay, well, I get strategically why you're doing that, but you do get that will then have an impact on the rest of the plan, right? And I think those are the types of things that just take a while for people to get used to.
Yeah, and then we cycle back to the different working methods, the different mindsets, and again, what people are used to in the working environment. Yep. And then I find it really interesting, cycling back to what you were saying about that last year, that year of transformation, and the clarity and the drive and almost a sense of urgency that gets rid of all the crap that sits around that, and you're laser focused on what you're trying to do. Is that something that can be replicated across, or do we need to grow our teams into that way of thinking? Do we need to kind of work through a process to get teams into that space? Because ideally, to be able to work like that regularly, I suppose the question is it possible? Does that lead to burnout? Is there some crisis point in there?
I think people often confuse like urgency with a frantic work environment that's like chaotic, when people are working really long hours. And I think there's a difference between having urgency and focus around what you do and then working in an environment where, you're running about like a blue arse fly and everybody has like 3 jobs to do and you don't know which way is up. And I think, like, if you work in change, you get used to the ebbs and flows, right? Because you go through periods in delivery where things are busier and you know to take advantage when it gets a bit quieter because, the next week it will be a bit crazy again. But I think the urgency and focus is about ensuring that everyone has that calibrated view of what the most important thing to do is. Yeah. And if you don't, you have a really clear path to get that clarity. And even more importantly, where there's contention between those priorities, you can then make a call really, really quickly about which thing you spend time on first. And that, again, was a really big learning for us as a leadership team at esure, because you would have a conversation with someone and they would say, but all of these things are really important, Laura, you have to do all of them. And I would say, I totally get that. And we're going to do them all, I promise. But I just need you to help me understand what order I need to go after these in, so that if there is contention between teams around whether they do this one or that one, they know which one they need to do first. And I think there was fear amongst some people that by calling a priority order and recognizing what was most important and most critical, that the thing that they really cared about wouldn't get done. But again, that was a confidence thing, right? So over time, we started to realize, oh, well, actually, when Laura says that, it's not that everything after number 5 is not going to get looked at. It's just that it might happen next quarter rather than this quarter. And that just takes time, right, for people to build up that confidence and familiarity with that type of decision-making process.
And actually, I think because we just come out of the pandemic, we were dealing with Ukraine crisis, that there was some much bigger themes going on. I can't remember any real sort of unhelpful behaviour where people were just being really belligerent and difficult. Actually, when we had those conversations, Laura, yes, it was tough for some people to have to let some things go, and that required vulnerability and trust in us and compromise, but they weren't going to be difficult about it and just dig their heels in completely irrationally, because that wasn't going to help any of us, was it?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that.
So there's something, Laura, I'd like to explore. You talked before about when people become their very best in those emergency situations, but how do you think, as humans and as people in the workplace, we try and tap into that on a more regular basis, so that we're achieving our fullest potential, our fullest self to work every day?
It's a really good question, right? Because, and I know you're a big proponent of systems thinking, James, there's elements of this that are within your control to influence, and there's elements that aren't. Some of it will very much depend upon the broader system that you are operating within. So for example, we had technology teams who were working in an agile framework doing iterative delivery, and they had people who were called product owners, but actually they had no decision-making accountability. They had to go to a business owner, and we are absolutely not like that now. But that would be an example where you had teams who wanted to operate in agile. They wanted to have the single points of decision making, the federated accountability, early delivery of value. But if the broader system doesn't enable you to do that and to operate in that way, then you will always be impeded in how far you can take it. So I think you can definitely push the boundaries of what the organisation is willing to do. And as someone who's worked in big organisations, you can always find those little chinks of light, those lighthouses, those little islands where people have managed to achieve a really exemplary way of working in a much bigger organisation. And then, people find them and they're like, oh, go over there and find out what James and Alex have done. How have they done that? How did they make that work? And people become really interested in you. And then it's like, well, how do we scale that across the organisation? So I think definitely be hopeful and optimistic about what you can achieve and what you're willing, how far you think you can push whichever organisation you're working in. A lot of the roles that I've done have been around how do you create the conditions for success at an enterprise level for teams like that to flourish. I know firsthand how hard it can be to establish those things, whether it's about where ownership for capability sits and how you form those cross-functional teams, whether it's how priorities are set. For that model to work really well, you have to have all of those things in place, and that's how you scale it. And only you can make a call around whether the organisation that you're part of will be willing to let you push the boundaries of that, and whether those more structural conditions are in place. And if they're not, and that's what you want to do, then I think sometimes you have to make the really hard call. This isn't the place for me, and somewhere else is. And, it very much depends on how you're wired and where you are and what you're willing to do.
So, Laura, if you were to go back in time and give younger Laura some advice or some encouragement, I can't believe that she actually ever needed any more encouragement. What are there any things that you would go back in time and say to younger Laura, just do this? What would it be?
So I think one of the things that esure really cemented for me, and I hope that you felt this way too, James, was that as an individual, you were able to be your authentic self at work. And so for me, part of why I've really enjoyed the time that I've had working at esure has been because I've worked in other organisations where and the way the feedback's been delivered to me over the years has varied in terms of how it's been framed. I remember when I was a consultant, one of the bits of feedback I got was that I was a bit of a rough diamond that needed some polishing, and that, I was very Scottish. Which I remember at the time thinking, I am from Glasgow, that is in Scotland, right? It was an American person. And, I'm always open to feedback. Like, I'm always really keen to get other people's perspective of how I show up, because I think that it's really interesting to understand other people's interpretations of how you are. And, there's been lots of opportunities to get feedback at esure, feedback that I've agreed with and feedback that maybe I've found a bit more challenging to deal with. But regardless of all of that, I've always felt like I could come into work and be me. And I've not always felt like that in my career, which I think is not a particularly exceptional thing. I think a lot of people feel that way. But I think there was a long time, probably like in my late 20s, early 30s, where I felt like I needed to try and conform, and I wasn't as much as I was confident in who I was. I paid too much attention to other people's perspectives and was made to feel like I shouldn't be as comfortable in my own skin as I was, if that makes sense. And so if there was one piece of advice I would give to myself, it would be to trust my instincts around that. And actually, to the point that I made, if an organisation is making you feel that way, then I'd suggest that probably that's not the right organisation for you to be in, because I feel really confident that there is a team out there, multiple teams out there for everyone, where you can go and be, and it sounds really cheesy, right? But be the best version of you and be authentic to you. And you shouldn't feel like, we all want to learn, right? I think I have a huge capacity to learn. I really, learning really excites me. And the minute that I stop learning, then I'll probably sink into a deep depression, right? Because I really thrive on it. It's not to say that you can't improve, but you also need to feel like the people around you've got your back and that they trust you and respect you for who you are, not for a person they're trying to make you become.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, just to jump in there as well, we've picked up on a thread that's now 3 podcasts have just said exactly the same thing, which is this power in being authentic and feeling that, we can be us, right? And that's an ongoing journey of exploration and change and development. But it just sends me to thinking that, what we're saying, a lot of the things that we're experiencing and seeing, and I know some of the stuff that James and I work through is, and James has said this, is, how much potential is left on the table. And for people to feel able to really stretch themselves and get into that space where they can start to really realize their potential and grow and learn at pace and explore and experiment, they have to be comfortable being them. Because if you're spending all this time kind of adapting and becoming a chameleon to fit into this particular type of style, well, that's where your effort and energy is going, rather than focusing on who you could be and what you could do. So I couldn't agree more with that piece. I love it.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for taking your time on a Friday to talk to us. I think what you've shared will be so valuable. The things we've talked about in terms of competing demands, priorities, pressure situations, lots of stuff going on, that there are many people and organizations that are facing into that. But your way of just calmly going to the facts, working it through, bringing people with you, and being able to do that in an authentic way, it will be so useful to others to hear. So thank you for sharing that. If people want to reach out and get in contact with you, how should they do that?
Yep, I'm on LinkedIn, Laura Thom. So if people want to get in touch, they can definitely get me on there.
Brilliant. And for those listening, I hope this was useful. Check out We.Are.Powerful.org for more content and useful links. Contact us via the website if you want to get involved. And wherever you listen to us from, follow, subscribe, recommend this to others if you think it would be useful. And above all, be powerful.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for coming Friday afternoon.
Thank
with
you.
us.
And I should say Happy Christmas as well, because this will probably be going out around about Christmas time. So this is our Christmas special.
Is it? Oh, I suppose it is.
Gomez Murray jumper, and you can see the one part of my Christmas decorations that have actually been put up already.
You've gone festive there, Laura. I can see
Yeah,
a
I've made an
Newcastle
effort.
football apron behind you, Alex. What
Are
is-
we really
is that
doing
a new
this?
accessory?
You'd not prepped me for any kind of Christmas celebratory vibe
I
at
feel
all.
like
I
I need
am-
to put my Christmas light.
I like that, yeah.
I am.
There we go. The Christmas lights are on.
Okay, I'm going to stick my red lights on.
You got disco lights in your office.
If there's red lights, you won't be able to see them. Well, Merry Christmas, everybody. I feel like there should be
Merry
Merry
silence in the
Christmas.
background.
Merry Christmas.